Out of his contract over the weekend, ESPN basketball analyst Dan Dakich joined the Ryan Russillo show and had a flaming hot take on CP3's leadership. Take a listen.
These teams never do well. There's always bickering. There's always complaining. There's always whining, and he's the leader. It's like he's the leader.
But they're a different cloth. Isaiah grew up in the west side of Chicago. That's entirely a different place than growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina. When we grew up in the 70s and 80s is entirely different than being in 2017. Him not being as vocal on court or coming out in the paper and calling out, like a lot of times when I watch these shows or read these people or hear them on the radio, they talk about guys calling out somebody else. They consider that to be leadership. I don't. I consider the way you handle yourself to be leadership. I consider how when something comes around, when everybody is down, you're the one picking up your teammate. When there's all the arrows, you're the one standing in front taking them. Now, he does that. That's a leader to me.
Okay, this is the argument. This is why Dan has a point, okay? It's a combination of what the Clippers have been able to achieve with Chris as their leader and a reflection of who the Clippers are. Listen to me, hear me out. Number one, I believe Chris Paul has the record for most playoff appearances to have never reached a conference final. Never reached a conference final, but been in the playoffs and played more games in the playoffs than anyone else who could say that about themselves. So they have not overachieved. And let's not pretend like Chris Paul's playing on a team like Russell Westbrook, like you just talked about a minute ago. What? He's had Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan. He's had players along with him. So the Clippers have not, at the very least, overachieved, and many would say they have underachieved. That's point number one. Number two, and this is the more direct point to Dan's argument, it's the dysfunction of the Clippers. That if you look at that team, their body language, Chris Paul's body language, the way they complain, Blake, Jordan, Doc, that they bellyache, they moan, they have bad body languages, they don't get along. Something's not working with the Clippers. So I'll just ask you this. If Chris Paul's the leader, that only gives us one of three options. One, he's a bad leader, and he's causing some of that dysfunction, as Dan points out. I can't buy into that because I don't have enough evidence. But number two, if he is such a great leader, why can't he correct that? That's what leadership is. Leadership is stepping into a bad situation and turning around the boat. Leadership's not easy. Leadership is hard. So at the very least there, Chris isn't turning around that dysfunction. Or third option, and this one's is equally hard to buy as it's Chris's fault, is it's completely and utterly unleadable. That the Clippers are beyond help, and Chris could do nothing to help it.
I'm going to go with that one.
Because that's an indictment of everybody.
Because the truth, Pierce retired. Now, if I had his number and could have awakened him at 3 o'clock in the morning, I would have called him and asked him a question directly, because they try to bring in a champion mentality. So I think that's what it is. It's the same thing I was talking about Westbrook. When you bring in a mentality, the team takes on that mentality. I think they forced Chris on that squad. We all know when it was a Laker, then thrown back and then put on the Clippers. I think Blake being hurt. I think all of those things tie into it.
I just think sometimes the leaders, you can't make chemistry work all the time. And also just want to throw this fact out there that Chris Paul was reelected as the president of the Players Association. So he is a leader outside of that court. But look, criticism.
That team is not being led. You can ask why. And at some point, you look at the guys who are the leaders and go, why?
Well, Dan certainly had his criticisms. Magic Johnson also very critical.